So for today's discussion, we will mainly be focusing on review, how to do a good review, because in the earlier meetings that we had online, we had a couple of questions on that. So I thought that would be a good topic to talk about. And today, as the poster indicated, that we have three excellent reviewers who will be sharing their experience with us. And we have Professor Albert Asaf from University of Massachusetts, and we have Professor Florian Koch from Copenhagen Business School, and we have Professor Mimi Lee from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, and we have our managing editor, Professor Sang-Wan Park here with us. So I guess we should get started because I planned for 45 minutes. And why don't we just go around the room among the three panelists to share maybe just some initial thoughts about your review experience, maybe just 2 or 3 minutes, anything you want to share to start off the conversation. Any one of you would like to start?
I can maybe start. I happen to maybe review more than 70, 80 papers a year for different journals. And sometimes this is very overwhelming and it takes a lot of our time, and especially if you want to do it right. And so hopefully today we'll get the chance to talk about how to do it right? And I can also give a little bit of my perspective, being also the editor of Tourism Economics, of what, also I ask reviewers should do when reviewing papers. And maybe Cathy can also talk as well about, being an editor of tourism management, what you're looking for when, you're inviting people to review papers. So it's a lot of work, and I think it's a very important step toward having, good papers published, especially in top journals. So I think, Cathy, you're doing this today is a great idea. And hopefully that, what I'm trying to focus on is how to be constructive when reviewing paper rather than just, destroying a paper and being rude and negative. That's the key issue here.
Yeah, good point. Maybe I see your mic is on. So would you like to share a couple minutes?
Sure. I started to do paper review when I first joined PolyU, quite a long time ago. And I don't review as many as I don't review as many as 70, 80 papers per year. I probably review around 40 papers per year. Normally, I only review the papers that I have expertise in, or I'm serving on the editorial board. I think review is a very important stage in getting paper published. And as a researcher, I do benefit a lot from other people's comments. If I compare my first version, the first version of my papers with the final published one, I can see a huge difference between the two versions. So I think the review process is very, very significant in improving the paper quality. As I see the audience today, I see some junior faculty members, some junior researchers. So I think in addition to what makes a good reviewer, I think we can also discuss something like what are the reviewers looking for when they read a paper. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Florian?
Yes, thanks again for having me. I think it's a great initiative, and I'm more than happy to contribute to it, because when I review and I'm sitting on the editorial boards of let's say the three big tourism journals, TM, Annals, and JTR, and it's the same mistakes I see. And most of the mistakes actually fall in the dimension of lack of originality. So this is one of the things I also want to talk a little bit more about today, because I sometimes feel that this there's a lot of tacit knowledge that is very hard to grasp for many people. Okay, what is original enough, especially for the leading journals? And I would think that most of the papers that I review, for most of them, I have a pretty good understanding of the potential after reading the introduction. Of course, I read the whole paper and I spend significant time on every review. But the introduction already tells quite a lot about the potential of the paper. And relatively easy things you can do also to avoid wasting a lot of time before submitting. And I hope we also get time to talk about that today. I just feel also that some authors are, let's say, not, how can I put that, not diplomatic enough when it comes to their revision 1, revision 2. They could act in a more constructive way. So I would also like to reflect a little bit about that today. Thank you.
Okay, great. So you mentioned about what do you look for? I guess all of you review for many other journals as well, but each journal has a little different positioning, and maybe the expectations are quite different from journal to journal. What do you look for in the manuscript when you review for tourism management?
You want me to take this first?
Sure.
I can do that. Okay.
Yep.
So hopefully I don't sound rude jumping on this every time. Anyway, so I think, the key issues that I look for is originality of the paper, how original the paper is. And I always look for statements in the introduction, like Florian said. And I think authors should not be shy of highlighting what has been done before and how their paper depart from the literature. I think that makes our life much easier as reviewers when we look for statement. And I actually respect authors when they clearly state what has been done and how they depart from the existing literature. When reviewing for TM, it's always in the back of my mind that this is a top journal. And this is how authors, I think, should treat the journal when submitting their papers. It's unfortunate that sometimes I think we come across papers that, okay, let's try our luck here and see what happens. Okay, it's papers moving around and let's try, it might hit, it might not hit. And I think respecting the journal and reading about what this journal published, the style of this journal, is very important, I think, for anyone submitting to TM or any other journal. So how important the paper is to the reader, like from theoretical implications. Who is going to read this paper? And I always look for papers that are not context specific. They're not limited to a certain context. It's always a good idea to use the context as just as a support to, kind of test your hypothesis, test your theory. But you always should have in the back of your mind, I as an author, and also reviewers look for this, is how can we generalize these findings? Who's going to read this? Is the broader tourism literature going to benefit from a paper like this? And also the scientific reliability of the paper. Has the data been collected right? Have the research questions been addressed correctly? The hypothesis, the theoretical framework, the conceptual arguments made in the paper, and of course the method. Okay, I'm sure, Cathy, you come across papers that make a lot of mistakes in the method, right? Either in terms of sampling, in terms of estimation, in terms of clearly, robustness, checking for all possible way to actually test for competing models, etc. So these are issues that I also look for. And of course, as I mentioned, is how practically and how theoretically important the paper is like how you can tell as a reviewer if the authors have actually spent good time in writing the paper, or it has been rushed or has been submitted quickly. So these are the issues I usually look for when reviewing the paper.
Okay, basically everything. But you mentioned a good point because quite often I see reviewers comment that the authors rush the papers through. If they have just taken a bit more time, a bit more thinking, it could have been a much better and that will go through the process.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you take sometime 1 more month to write the paper, you can, significantly increase your chance of at least receiving a revision. So rushing through submissions is always not a good idea.
Yeah. Mimi.
Yeah, I agree with Albert's points on everything. I just want to share how I review a paper. I think first of all, a catchy title is very important. Sometimes we see very plain title. Sometimes we see very fussy title that we don't really know from the title that what the paper is trying to say. So a catchy but clear title is very important. Secondly, I normally start with reading the abstract, and because I think abstract provide us the basic information about the paper, including the research method, the objectives and major findings, and also the conclusion. So basically from the abstract, we can tell the quality of the paper. And then the introduction is very important, as Albert mentioned, that although we read the whole piece of paper, but normally we can tell the whether this paper is of any originality or whether this address a valid research gap in the literature can be reflected in the introduction, especially whether there is a very clear statement on the research objective and also what are the gaps the research is trying to address should be clearly stated in the introduction. And then I will jump to research design because I feel that a good research design is informed by a thorough literature review. So even sometimes the literature review is not that well developed, but if the research design is reasonable, is rigid, then we can tell that the authors did a good job in reviewing relevant literature, but just didn't do a very good job to present the literature. So I think literature review at the first stage of my review is not that important. I will jump to the research design to see whether there is any fatal problems with the research design. And this is normally I reject some paper because there are some problems with the research design that cannot be fixed. Even after multiple rounds of revision, if the problem cannot be fixed, then I will just reject the paper in this stage. And after that, I think conclusion is important. Sometimes the authors they did a very complicated data analysis, and they have very they are very feasible practical implications, but they don't have a deep discussion of the theoretical contribution. So this is sometimes I see some papers are missing the theoretical discussion, and this is normally appeared in the conclusion. Even you may have some discussion of the findings in the context of literature, but still at the end of the paper there should be a summary of the theoretical contribution, and then. So this is basically what my style of review at the first stage. And then I will also look at the writing style, as Albert mentioned, that some people they rush, sometimes they don't, they're even very, I will see very careless grammar mistakes in the paper, which make the research work very painful. Yeah, that's my experience.
Okay, thank you. Florian.
When I review, I go by the 3 big criteria: originality, relevance, or some also call it significance, although there's a difference between these two, and the rigor. And if I have to rank them, 8 out of 10 papers I reject. Maybe 9 out of 10 is because of a lack of originality. Then 1 because of lack of significance or relevance, and 1 lack of rigor. However, rigor can often be repaired in a sense. You can you can address such comments. Originality is, as I said, probably a dilemma for many submitting authors, because we all know that papers have to be original in order to get accepted at TM, right? But we still don't know, okay, how do we come up with original ideas? What is originally enough? And when I review, that is my first consideration. Is there some potential, even if the paper is not original enough, can I help the authors to flesh out the originality more, the contribution more? And that is exactly what should be clearly outlined already in the introduction. In 2020, actually with Albert, we wrote a paper on how to come up with original research ideas, because it was also my struggle. And of course, not all my papers are based on the highest originality. And I think oftentimes, and we just heard that you have to explain what gap you're filling. Oftentimes I see papers, those papers that are then rejected, that even in the introduction explain quite a lot what they intend to do and what existing research has done, often to artificially create a research gap. So I'm very careful whenever I hear the word, okay, we have to find a research gap and we have to fill a research gap. Most of my research that I approach actually does not start with this question, because you might actually get into a very nitty-gritty discussion of, is this gap now big enough for TM, or should we go one level lower in terms of journals? So I think the easiest way for authors to argue for both their relevance and originality is by starting the introduction with real world examples and convince me, okay, there are people who care about it. This is not something artificially constructed, and also catch the interest of the reader. Especially the first and second paragraph is super important. And when I see an interesting paper, and even if it has some problems with a rigor, with a method, with the data, you can collect new data. It's not really a deal breaker, but it really has to catch my interest and be creative, right? And then of course I'm also a little bit more flexible and give the authors a little bit more leeway if I see that this is something I have not reviewed before. So really surprise me with a new idea and be creative. I think it's a really good way to make it to the first revision or second revision round.
And since we have 3 reviewers for each paper, and a couple of you mentioned about whether the paper has any fatal issues, and I guess obviously when there is a fatal issue, you don't think the issue can be resolved, then your recommendation will be to reject the paper. But very often, if we get one reviewer suggesting a rejection, whereas the other 2 see potential, then it's likely the editor will give the author a chance to try another submission. So if you're the reviewer in the minority, suggest a rejection, and you get to be invited again to look at the revision, is it possible for the authors to change your mind from a very negative view of the paper to somewhat more positive? What does it take to persuade you as a reviewer that the fatal issue that you spotted earlier have been fixed, or is it possible?
It's a fatal issue that requires a complete rewriting or a complete re-estimation. I'm not like, I don't believe that I won't change my mind. I usually respect the editor's wish. And the good thing about TM is it gives you the chance to read what other reviewers have said about the paper as well. And that's a great thing to have, because we're all, we might not see everything in the paper. We're all human at the end. We might not like, even especially if the paper is not right into our, expertise area, right? So we might have missed something. And if the author respects every comment and have addressed them carefully and thoroughly. I've actually changed my mind several times from being complete reject to a major revision or a minor revision after the second round. So this goes back to my earlier comment is reviewers should also be humble in how they write their comment. They should be constructive, and they should not actually kill the paper just for the sake of killing the paper. So from that perspective, I'm always willing to change my mind.
Okay.
If the authors address the comments carefully.
Yeah. I'm sure the authors would appreciate that.
That's
in my in Florian, do you want to go first?
Go ahead, please. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. In my case, normally I reject paper because of for two reasons. One is research design, and the other is lack of originality. I think for the research design problem, if it's fatal problem, and I will fight with the editor that even the other two reviewers think that this is okay, but I will still I will argue with editor that this paper doesn't meet the quality of tourism management, and the further revision is required. But if it's for the originality, then if I am the only reviewer giving negative comments, I will respect the other two reviewers' comments, and because probably I'm not the expertise in the particular area, and then it will be a good chance to learn. So it depends on what is the problem, the reason for me to reject the paper.
Okay, great. Florian?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question and also tricky to answer because, of course, as reviewers, we should think very carefully and have very good reasons for rejecting our paper because we have quite a lot of power here, right? So what would change my mind is, as I said before, 8 of the 10 papers I rejected probably because of a lack of originality. So here it's a bit harder to change my mind. I think the lack of rigor or relevance, if I reject it because of that, yeah, I can see some room for changing my mind here. It really depends on how much the authors have invested. If they have really turned the paper around and collected new data and really extended on the literature review to make the contribution or to position the paper better, yes, then I would do that. I think I did that twice. I can say that. I'm not sure what I did it for TM, but twice where it was a reject and I got the paper again, and I was really impressed with what the authors did, and then I was more than happy to also join the major revision chorus in that sense. But it rarely happens, I have to say.
Yeah. You all mentioned about originality, and we have a question in the chat box. What is originality, and how can the authors articulate or convince the reviewer that this is really original? Florian, since you're on the mic.
Of course, originality has many faces. I know this is probably not the answer that you had hoped for, but originality can come in many different ways. In one way, originality can come, of course, is when a new phenomenon, right, is now examined by the authors for the first time, right? Something that tourism managers facing at the moment, some new developments that has never been looked at in tourism. It could also be something that has been looked at in other disciplines. Does not have to be social sciences, whatever. I'm working quite a lot with evolutionary psychology, which is biology research. So, and by bringing that into the tourism hospitality domain, you can maybe call this to be an original paper, because I'm bringing in new mindsets, new conceptual models, new ways of creating knowledge, so new epistemologies. It can come in very, very different forms. It could also be by challenging the assumptions that we have in our discipline. I always like to say that often our discipline also disciplines us in the way that over the years we just take for granted what we hear in papers every day, and going beyond that, critically thinking about that. I know, Katie, also in the TM submission, not submission guides, but in the aims, you have challenge, right? You want to challenge existing views. This is how, of course, you build new theories. So that is also a way of creating originality. Maybe I stop here also to give the two others.
All right, Albert, what is your take on originality?
Yeah. So originality is easier said than done. You know, I believe, like, just to, you know, what Florian said, I fully agree with him on those issues. And him and I had a lot of conversations over the years about similar points. I see originality as well as not just adding one variable to an existing model. Is to significantly depart from an existing model, or to come up with a fully new idea. So I was speaking to a professor of marketing the other day. He publishes regularly in Journal of Marketing and Marketing Science, you know, the premier journals in marketing, which are very hard to hit. And I said to him, how do you do that? And he said he goes to companies and he asks them, what is a challenging idea for you now? I mean, what do you like me to do for you? And he builds this whole research idea around this particular challenge that the company has. So this is how he departs from. So there's many ways on how you depart. You can depart by significantly improving an existing concept, as Florian said, or coming up with a fully new ideas. I think the fully new idea is easier than trying to significantly improve an existing theory, which you need to really significantly depart from what has been done. And the writing has a lot to do with it, how you sell the story and how you write the story, and how you can convince the reader about that this paper is really an important step forward in improving the literature in this area. And so it can be done in many different ways. Some are easier than others, I think.
Yeah. It has a lot to do with storytelling and identifying gaps in the literature. It's just like innovation. Innovation doesn't have to be, you know, completely new that nobody has ever done before. But how do you, you know, to sort of articulate that this is something really different from the literature? Mimi, sorry.
Originality is something as researcher we always seek for. It's quite difficult to define what an original paper is, but I can share some of my experience with the paper that I feel not original. Normally, I reject paper due to originality for 4 types of reasons. The first reason is that the theory or the concept has been well established, well examined in many other area, but haven't been done in a particular geographic region. For example, China. Then it's definitely not an original paper. There are a lot of research, a lot of paper rejected because of this reason. They just apply something old in a new context. So this is the first type of rejection I see. The second part is, as Albert mentioned, that adding new construct to existing models, or putting several models together, putting several theories together without a valid reason, and then doing a lot of data-driven analysis. This is another typical reason for me to reject paper. And sometimes now we are encouraging interdisciplinary research, and we see more and more interdisciplinary research. But sometimes the idea might be new in tourism or hospitality, but it's actually nothing new in other fields. So if the reviewer is not familiar with the literature in other fields, they may feel that this is a new concept, this is something new. But if they just read several papers in a particular field, then it's easily seen that the idea is nothing new. They just introduce something that we didn't learn from textbook to tourism. Then that's definitely not original paper. And then we also see some research with very interesting idea, with very original idea. But then if you read the article carefully, you will see that the concept, although it's new, it's original, it's very interesting, but they use the wrong concept, or they interpret it wrong, or they didn't articulate it well. So this is sometimes I feel very a little bit disappointed, because when I read the abstract, I'm very excited that this is a very interesting piece of paper. And then as I read through the introduction, the literature review, the research design, I'm like, oh, I feel very sorry for the author. They find a good idea, but they didn't do it well. So this is also a rejection.
Okay. There is a question.
Cathy, can I say something else, like for reviewers to do? I think it's also important, when you don't have a very strong expertise in a certain area, to clearly highlight that to the editor, that, you cannot judge this particular concept well. So the editor has a clear idea that, they might need to invite a new reviewer, or maybe need to rely more on the other two reviewers. So I believe reviewers should clearly highlight, I kind of, what Mimi said, attracted my attention on this issue. If you don't have a strong expertise in what you're reviewing, clearly highlight it to the editor.
Yeah. We recently added an item for the reviewer to tell us on a scale of 1 to 10, what is the level of their expertise with this particular topic, so that we can, judge the comment. In terms of the perspective, what perspective they're coming from. But sometimes we do invite people outside of the expertise areas to look at the big picture. An example I can think of is I invited somebody from with expertise in qualitative study, human resources, to look at a very complicated quantitative study. I want her to tell me, does it make any difference, right? Is it important? Don't worry about the methodology. I just want to know, go back to your term, originality. Shall we publish something like that? So yeah, sometimes we do have a variety of reviewers in terms of background and expertise, but it will be very helpful for the editor to know. Mimi, there is a question in the chat box for you about research design. How to write?
Yeah. I see the question. Well, actually, we have a lot of very good examples of good research design. You can just refer to the papers that have been published on the top tier journals. And also we have a lot of research design books that you can refer to what is a good research design. But unfortunately, we actually see a lot of research design that is not that good. For example, like the most simplest example is that for quantitative research using SEM, the sample size is not big enough. I see some of this research, but it's getting less. And also, for example, in the structural equation modeling analysis, they are missing certain part of analysis in the overall design. I think that's also a major problem. It shows that the author didn't pay a very good attention to the research design. It's not only a technical issue, it's also an attitude issue, that they just missing a certain important part of the research in the data analysis. And like, for example, in qualitative research, they don't have a statement on the paradigm of the research, the approach, the personality of the researcher. So those are all very basic issues. And if you look at any good research design book, then they will have a step-by-step statement on what should be included in a good research design. But some authors just miss the steps. Yeah.
For example, using PLS SEM just for the sake of fitting the model without actually providing a good reason why you're using PLS SEM, not covariance-based SEM, for example, right? So like whenever Florian and I wrote papers, we clearly highlighted why we're using PLS in this context, for example. And you see that a lot in many contexts missing, providing argument why this method is better than this method in this specific context as well.
Yeah, there is a difference between good design and good writing about design, right? So if the original design has flaw, then there's nothing you can do. But sometimes when the writing is very vague, we don't know if it's good or not. We have to see the details to find out.
I think they all go together, right?
Yeah. And I think the reviewers do look for clues in terms of the authors. Some of you mentioned paying attention to details and whether they got the basic terminology correct. If those are very obvious mistakes that appear throughout the manuscript, then you started to lose your confidence in the author's ability to conduct a really rigorous piece of work, isn't it? Yeah. There is a question about research topic. Actually, for tourism management, we're not the gatekeeper of research topic. We're looking at rigor of research. We're looking at quality rather than particular topic. Whether the topic is well researched, as long as you can find a new angle and you add an additional piece to it that can demonstrate the extent of originality the reviewers are looking for. It doesn't have to be a completely new niche area, new topic. So I don't think we're the gatekeeper of research topic, but we're more looking at the quality of research. After several rounds of review. Albert, you're an editor. What is your take?
Well, this is a very challenging, I think, question. I look at if two reviewers recommend accept and one rejection, I really clearly read the rejection comments. If the reviewer indicated that he or she's not a clear expert on this area, that might make my decision easier to make, right? If the reviewer is like a really, someone who has done research in this area, who's well-known expert in this area, I would tend to rely more heavily on their comment. And in many contexts, this happened to me. I ended up rejecting the paper just out of a respect to this reviewer who has done tremendous amount of work in this area. Like someone like High-End, for example, commenting on a forecasting. I'm just using him as an example, like in a specific area. Not that he rejected that paper, but that someone like High-End commenting on a forecasting paper, I would tend to rely heavily on his comments. So it depends on the comment themselves. Yeah.
I can think of an example, actually, since Mimi is here, I'm looking at her face on the screen. So I had a manuscript, a submission not long ago. Mimi was the only one, the one reviewer insisted on rejecting, whereas the other two reviewers were quite happy with the paper. But when I look at the comments, they weren't really doing a good job of reviewing the papers. So yeah, as an editor, we'll have to go back. Instead of just looking at reviewers' comment, I do read each and every submission, and especially those going through the review process. I do read each and every one of them. I read the reviewer's comment, there's recommendation, and I read the paper. So I would, if it's in my area, then I can make a judgment. If it's not in my area and the reviewers are in opposite view, and we have an editorial team, if it's something on big data analytics, I will very often ask someone to take a look. If it's something on forecasting, I will ask Lee to take a look. So we support each other. Hopefully, we're making the best decision possible. I mean, and you mentioned we're human, so we're trying to do the best we can, but we try to be fair. And that goes back to the earlier comment. I think a PhD student from Griffith University. Yes, it is extremely important to have good reviewers. We have 3 excellent reviewers here with us today, but they are rare. They are rare to find. So it is important for us to continue to develop good reviewers. Can you share with us a little bit, how did you become good reviewers? We didn't get the training in our grad school, right? So how did you learn to be a good reviewer?
Well, I think, experience matters on this issue. I think the more you review, the more you read. I think it goes back to being a good researcher yourself, really, because if you have the feeling of writing a good paper, you have the same feeling of judging on other people's work and having the expertise in the area that you're reviewing. So even though I review a lot of papers, and Mimi mentioned an important point, I think we should try not to review papers that are too far from what we do, because even though we're expert reviewers by now, we might not give a fair judgment. So it's always a learning process for me, and I'm always kind of learning on how to improve myself. And because we're active on research, all of us, I think that make our life much easier in reviewing papers. It's a very time-consuming process, especially if you want to do it right and break the paper into several pieces and look at them separately. So it takes a lot of time from us. So I don't think there is like a perfect recipe to learn how to be a good reviewer. It's all kind of a combination of multiple factors. Being a good researcher, do your, kind of work at, looking at what has been done in the literature and try to give a fair judgment. And as I mentioned, clearly state where you don't have expertise. That's a very fair statement to make. And so, yes, I think the more you do it, the easier it becomes for you to see the mistakes and to really highlight where the gaps are.
Yeah. Okay. Florian.
Yeah, I think what is very important in this regard is to have the intrinsic motivation and willingness to spend a considerable amount of your own time on someone else's work. I think we would actually see more reviews of excellent quality if more reviewers spend more time on these reviews. For example, in my case, even if I'm not familiar with some of the papers they cite, I download these quintessential papers and read them to make sure that what the authors claim is actually what the paper says that they reference. So yeah, you have to dedicate time, and I think then it's as Albert said, learning by doing. Of course, you also learn by receiving reviews when you submit your papers to TM or other journals. So I also learned quite a lot here. And yeah, having the willingness, taking some of your precious time out of your calendar to review, and not only half an hour but more, because the authors spend quite a lot of time, and you also want your reviewers who review your papers to spend significant time. So I think this is quintessential. But then at the same time, also make it easier for the reviewers to like your paper. And that goes back, Catchy, to the writing style, right? There's a concept in psychology called metacognitive experience. And if I feel I'm in the flow when reading the paper as a reviewer, I'm also more open to the ideas they bring in and the like. So make it easy, revise the paper. And working with Albert, when I think the paper is perfect, Albert comes back to me and say, okay, let's work through the whole paper one more time and really make it as good as it can be. So yeah, make it easy.
Okay. Mimi, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think Albert and Florian had made all my points: experience, learning, empathy. And on top of that, I would like to suggest to have a peaceful mind, because sometimes when you read the paper, you really get very angry. Yeah, like sometimes the paper was not being edited well. Sometimes they didn't follow the journal's guidelines. Sometimes the research idea is really, really boring, and I get angry. But you have to be peaceful to make fair decisions.
Catchy, in terms of the learning itself, I also learn as an author from reading comments made by other reviewers on my paper. So I also learn how to be a good reviewer by reading other reviewers' comments, when I receive them on my paper. So this is another opportunity, another place where you can learn how to make constructive comments.
Okay. All right. So if it takes so much time, and when also Mimi gets angry, why do you serve as a reviewer? Do you enjoy it? Albert, since you're here, go ahead.
It's hard to say I enjoy it, especially when it becomes so overwhelming, but what I enjoy, the part is I actually remain, like seeing what has been done and the current topics and the current development in the area can help you as a researcher yourself as well. So there is that benefit from reviewing papers and also like providing service to the field. But sometimes it becomes annoying when you have so many paper on your desk and you're behind and you're trying, to read in many different directions, different topics. So it's not always pleasant, but I enjoy doing it because I see myself as always learning from what other peoples are doing.
Yeah. Florian.
So I review because it directly caters to what to why I do this job in the first place, and that is to have impact, right? And I think I can have impact when publishing in TM and other leading journals, and I can have impact by helping others to publish great work, or also to reject a paper that should not take one of the very precious spaces in TM. So impact it is for me. Yeah, first and foremost. And of course, when that's not a goal conflict, right? When there is a good paper, I help the author team to get that published, be a constructive reviewer. Yeah, Mimi, you have said that, be constructive as a reviewer, be constructive as an author. We always have to remind ourselves of that. But in the end, we spend our time on doing good research and making existing research better to have more impact. So it all comes down to that.
Okay, great. Mimi?
Yeah, same here. It's hard to say that this is enjoyable work to review so many papers per year. I think it's more like a responsibility. And also, we know what is on the what are the trendy topics in the area. So it's also a learning opportunity for me.
Yeah, absolutely. You get to see what's happening, right? Firsthand.
Yes,
yeah. And you mentioned about responsibility. I learned it from an old journal editor who is now retired. He said, for every paper you submit to that journal, and actually you get feedback from the reviewer, you owe that journal 3 reviews.
Yes.
Because we're all doing it as a community, isn't it? You get 3 reviewers back, therefore you should contribute 3 reviews to the journal. I think that,
and maybe this is a good platform here to kind of highlight. I'm sure you're facing the same problem, how hard it is now to find reviewers. Sometimes you're inviting 8, 9 reviewers to get one acceptance and to accept a review. And I look at it as Florian said, we have responsibility to protect this field and to improve this field. So from that perspective, like providing the service back. So I have people who submit to tourism economics 7, 8 papers a year, and they never agree to review any paper. So I see that as kind of a selfish behavior sometimes, like we're doing the work for them and they don't want to help us.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. It is a community and we have to work collectively. Yeah. Going back to, there was an earlier comment about reviewer training. I think we will try our best to do more in the future. I don't know if workshop is possible online, but if I go to conferences, then I could propose we do a reviewer training workshop, or we'll brainstorm a little bit and see how can we nurture the next generation of excellent reviewers so that everybody will benefit. Right.
Yeah, like at UMass here, in our PhD teaching, we have a course where we give students a paper and we ask them to break it down into several pieces and comment on it and find the mistakes here and there, and where so it can be also part of a research method as well, of course, or a workshop that we can do, like a one-day workshop in a conference. It's so hard to do via Zoom, as you stated.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So it's been a pleasure speaking to the three excellent reviewers, and they're all editorial board member of tourism management. And I understand Albert has a class to teach, so you have to rush off into the traffic. And if any of you have any question, then obviously you can email me and I can see what we can do for the next webinar. So if there's no other question, I promise 45 minutes. We're 8 minutes over time. So thank you very much. Thank you, Albert. Thank you, Florian. And thank you, Mimi. And thank you.
Thank you, Cathy, for inviting us. And thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.